we still need to actually make that. The general managers will talk within their activities in terms of some of the direction that they're seeking in terms of how they would frame those programs. Because what you will see is that there are a number of quite large projects which are meaning that on the decisions of whether we continue with a lot of large or that balance of projects, because we just can't fit them all in within those borrowing limits at this point in time. So what it looks like at the moment is around about a 60-40 split between that's a sort of the waters transport infrastructure and the community infrastructure is what it looks like. So because we're like a graph on the next page, we'll show what it just looks like to put it in context. So the bars effectively are renewals committed and for prioritisation in terms of how we moved up. So what we've done is actually broken down all of our projects, prioritised renewals and said that we're not going to touch within those renewals programs. Then we've gone and said there's projects that are committed, and those are largely they're under contract, and then what is left, which is the green. So what we're looking to achieve is a budget for next year, an annual plan that actually is closer to the red line than those columns indicate at this point in time. So that just gives you an idea of the size and scale. And what we'll do is when we get to the actual activities, we'll step through effectively how that works, because the spreadsheets and information that you've got will actually show you all the projects that make up those various groupings. Sure. It does, and that won't happen. And what will happen is we'll end up what we've done this year is carrying forward some of those projects into next year. So the debt numbers will be most likely for those projects that aren't completed would be a little bit lower, but the program will then roll into next year. So it just pushes where the timing of that debt balance effectively is what that is doing. Correct. That's right. So, and I think I've said in previous meetings that we have built that capacity. So we would like to see that there'd be a higher delivery number within there. But I'm sorry to all the engineers, but I think we'll probably still won't get 100% in terms of that delivery.
So the 760 that you referred to is likely to be below
8. Yeah, in terms of
value of the project.
That's right, and then if we, the aim is to get this down to 500, but that might push up to 550, 560 as we carry forward projects out of this year into next year. But if we deliver 450 this year, for example, we'll have 50 million less debt on books that will go into next year if we end up with 550 next year. Does that make sense?
So yeah. Just Clint. Oh, so we probably just need to check in.
You did say my name. Yeah, sorry, that's right. Just checking. I was just I totally understand the ballpark figure and all that stuff. I guess what concerns me a little bit is I don't feel we know if there's potential downside that's maybe it's going to be mentioned later, but that the LTP was to have a sort of escalating curve in terms of dollar values for CapEx for the first half, and then there's I won't re-quote what Catherine said in an earlier meeting, but the second half of the LTP, I think we're probably all on the same page. We don't take that as gospel. So the first half, though, it was every year would just scale up in terms of dollar value, and now we're talking about we're going higher than planned this year, fraction higher next year, I think, than originally planned, but significantly lower than once you've refactored in the carry forward, and then the next year, it's going to have to be maybe sort of up, down, depending on a bunch of other stuff, and I just wonder if that's going to have OPEX implications in terms of, staffing requirements, all these things that maybe I can't see. So are you comfortable at this stage to have the starting point as that 500, or does that not leave enough room to kind of have a trajectory for the following year or two? Because I know the logic at the time was to scale upwards as opposed to up, down, down.
Look, it's a great question. We've designed those numbers to sit within those existing covenants that obviously may move. The less we do in the early years, the more, and the cheapest time to do anything is now. The cost of those things is only going to go north. And this is part of what we're trying to actually work through today in terms of actually understanding that, is because it does impact on resourcing of the business as well. And on the next slide, one of the questions that we'll have is that some of these are big projects versus a balance of projects, and that balance will also impact on what the organisation looks like to deliver that. So all of those things are relevant in that conversation. But I guess to answer your question, it is pushing the can down the road to some degree, unless there's a reset. But we're also looking and knowing that there are some variables in there that we just don't have good information on at this point in time to be able to sort of advise you to say, like, well, this is the implication if, and that we can, we're going to get bespoke covenants for growth projects, for example. That will change some of that conversation that comes down, but we don't have that information at this point in time. So in some ways, this is trying to set the annual plan into a position that allows us to leverage that going forward and put us in the best position for it without knowing exactly what that looks like. But there will be really hard decisions, not just to be made in the annual plan, but in the next annual plan, LTPA or LTP.
I guess we're not really flip-flopping though, in effect, in the fact that this year we're looking at 403 million, next year we're looking at 500 million in that capital program. Is it?
Yeah, we're still we're still delivering $500 million of capital a year. Is the intent to do. So we're not going down.
Well, just my understanding is we're talking 502 this year, and all I'm saying is that the previous plan was 431 this year, 457, 497, 551, and so forth. So it was going up by sizable chunks each year so that the exec team could scale up in various areas of the organisation so that we wouldn't run into, say, a COVID-type scenario coming not from external but from internal. And I think I'm exaggerating, but I'm just highlighting that we could have a similar kind of thing where you kind of have to put the brakes on and put the accelerator because we're trying to fit within something which maybe at the moment we don't even know where all that stuff's going to end up, as you say, Paul.
Just jump forwards too, if that's okay. Not a very exciting slide, but just in terms of what the split looks like, to give you an idea of what's available in terms of prioritisation, is that the slide on the left shows renewals. I just want to pick up on a comment that was made by Infracom yesterday in terms of renewals, because they said it was going to be 60%. So obviously that number is a lot smaller, and I haven't quizzed Jeff as to where he got the 60% from, or whether it's for non-growth councils, because it was a very, very large number, because like I said yesterday, we do our renewals program is based on asset management plans and based on similar numbers for depreciation. So but in terms of if you take renewals out, that's what's left in terms of growth and level of service, which we've taken the assumption that we're not going to, jump into reducing renewals as the big assumption that sits there. Okay. So without further ado, just trying to get the best way to do this. So what I'll do is I'll just talk through transportation. So if we just and then don't change this. Just it's all right, Nick. Just to explain the format that we've presented this in. If I just go from left to right, let's hope we've got left to right. Well, I'm looking at this now thinking, have we got left to right? But
Right.
so starting on the left in terms of like the amount on that 60-40 ratio that we can spend in transportation is $191 million. It's north of 270 at the moment. And if we look then at the next column of renewals being 27 million and committed being 140, that's what the business has gone through and effectively said, well, renewals we know what that is, and then committed as things under contract that are continuing effectively within there. The next is effectively, the next three columns are effectively sort of when we get into the target that we've got left to spend once you take that renewals and committed into account is $23 million. That $23 million is actually out of the balance of the program of 111, i.e. you need to reduce it by 88 million. So it's a big ask effectively that sits within there. Now we've done well summarised. We've done this for every activity, so there's always the ability to move between the activities that sits there, subject to the funding things we've hit there. But this is just done so that we've set the envelopes to keep within those numbers that sit there. So it's still a big program that exists, just based on the committed projects, though. So it's not like we're saying we're not going to deliver much in transport. That and I should have brought this number, but of what our previous transport programs have been, but there's still $167 million of committed and renewals effectively that will be spent in the year. So it still is I can remember a few years ago when we were 100 million for transport. So it is, to put it in context, even though the prioritisation number of 23 million is awfully scary with what's needed, there still is a lot happening in the transport space based on that. Catherine, you're going to
I was just going to say the actuals delivered was 152
152.
at the end of 2024, so it's still a big program.
Yeah.
So, and just interested, so those renewals, like how have we got to those renewals? Is that...
So they'll be based on asset management programs.
So that's sort of prioritised as to the most important, or it's on what we're being funded for? Or we get to choose on the renewals funding?
Yeah, we set the program based on effectively the asset management, and Nick or Mike can probably talk a lot better about this, but effectively it's based on condition of the asset's useful life. Like we don't just replace because it gets to 10 years and replace it. It's based on the useful life of the asset.
No, that's fine. Like, yeah, no, I guess that's just is it the useful life or is it the most need? And that's really that's probably just where we need to prioritise that it's the most need. Like something might be due for renewal, but it's actually still in very good condition. But there's something with potholes which maybe is, not needed for not needed for the next 2 years, but.
And some of renewals in transport will be like if it's a reseal or a rehab, and if you don't do reseals, you may end up with much more expensive rehabs. That's the extent of my transport.
No, but it's all evidence based, and it's not like we expect a seal to last for 10 years and then we go replace it. We make sure that we make an assessment of the asset and see if we can squeeze a few more years out of its useful life. So it's all evidence based, and actually we've just had feedback from NZTA on the technical audit, which they audit us so that we spend our monies in this base maintenance operations renewals appropriately, and they came back very complimentary. So we've got really good systems and processes in place to make sure that we do we do squeeze the last day of life out of the assets that we've got. Yep, all evidence-based.
Okay, so now we're going to just, I'll just check in to say effectively is that we can put these slides up for each activity to give you an idea of the overview, or we can jump into the what does transport look like in terms of the line by line, just to show you where the.
We're going to start with city
apparently
centres.
Gareth's volunteering to go first. Sorry,
There's a little bit of volunteering, a little bit of voluntold. But I guess if you look at the city centre, it's quite a succinct portfolio of work, and it's quite illustrative of the scale and size of the kind of decisions that you've got to make. So it's quite a good one to do first. So you can see renewals 8 million, committed 71. The balance of projects that we want to deliver in 2026 is $77 million of work, and based on the 60-40 split, there's $17 million. So there's $60 million to save or defer or cancel worth of projects. And I guess I just wanted to point out that most of those projects in the 77 are continuations of projects we've already got underway. They're all good projects. They all fall out of our guiding city centre documents, whether it's the CCAIP, the Waterfront Master Plan, the Te Manawataki Master Plan, a wide variety of other plans. You know, they're all things that have been talked about for a long time. But the scale of the challenge is we want to spend 77 and there's 17. It's kind of as simple as that. And then we put up a list and we need to work through a process next week of going, well, of the 77 million, if there's only 17, which ones do you want to do? That end.
I think just importantly to that is that what we want to glean out of today is how you would like that presented to you to be able to make those decisions next week in whatever form you would like.
So as an example, if you go down to the green prioritisation, moving to construction for Memorial Park is $31 million in 2026. So we, based on an availability of 17 million, you couldn't do that. Continuing with the construction of the CWEM is 12 plus 9 plus 3.5. There's all of the budget available to us used up to keep that project going at the expense of every other one on that list there. And that's the decision. Or that's where we need guidance from you to say, okay, we do need to push out Memorial Park because we want to get the CWEM finished, get on with it, or whatever it is. But I guess, very simply, that's the starkness of the kind of challenge that you've got in front of you over every portfolio that's involved in capital delivery for the organisation. And City Centre's 60 million, you just heard Transport's 88 million. It's pretty simple. Happy to answer any questions.
No, thank you, and that's really good. Like,
Yeah.
just to actually understand, and we're actually getting to a point where we've got to make some pretty tough calls. So
Exactly right.
yeah, I think this is a really good layout. And now, when I read it, I didn't quite understand, but now I do. So thank you.
Who's next? Did I get my hooker tie? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think to be frank, just with this time we have, I don't think we need to, debate this right now. Like, this is, but we understand, and we can go through, between now and the meetings. I guess, what would be just from a guide, some of these things mean nothing to us. Like the civic centre is probably much easier for us because we understand. But if we go to transport or water, like, well, I have no. so we kind of need that probably direction a little bit from staff. Like, if you want, list it from your highest to your lowest sort of priority, that how you say it, and then we can. Yeah. Sorry,
in support of the Mayor's position, I've been through this process before where exactly as you said, there are things that we're familiar with and we can see above ground and we go, right, yes, no, but then there's a lot of things infrastructure-wise, under the ground, level of service, things that we don't see, and that stuff in a flight to safety stays in the budget, but the visual stuff disappears. The parks and reserves argument, you know, the poor kids have missed out on a new swing, etc. So we need somehow to have I appreciate the 60-40 thing is a good start, but we need some sort of a framework to equitably and fairly approach this, and how we feed into that, I'm not quite sure.
And a layer that doesn't apply to all of them, but for the example you gave, Gareth, is a good one, where sometimes there are projects like CWEM, Exhibition and Gallery, committed, and then CWEM for prioritisation, Exhibition and Gallery, CWEM Museum. So it's also to understand if there's any cost implications there or any contractual implications. So that would apply to anything in this list that has sort of related, like Memorial Park Stage 2, you know, is there anything linked to Stage 1 in this year, you know. So I don't know how to, unless we go through, you know, they're important enough projects we can just talk about it, but I think for me that'd be the other helpful piece of information. And probably the other comment I make at this stage is that ultimately, to frame it up, you know, I still like the way that Auckland, who were dealing to some extent with some similar things, that they framed it up around a consultation process as opposed to decisions, because then we can actually ask our community for guidance around some of what Councillor Morris was just talking about. Whereas if it's a subtle difference, but I think to always keep in mind what is it that we can present clearly to the public. Some things will be too complex to do that, but some will probably be some stark decisions, just like they made in Auckland, which got very, very good feedback from what I've heard.
So the 60-40 split, to a degree, boxes us collectively into cutting stuff out potentially from one of the activity areas that actually we might not want to. And so whilst we can go through this process, we will be bringing reports to you later in the year or early next year about some decisions on those big ones. Like, I think CWEM, we're looking at 9 December, and Memorial Park, depending where we land on Tuesday next week, there may be some decisions early next year about that. And so I don't know that we can do this exercise necessarily without actually understanding where you might end up with those two projects, for example. There's some work going on with netball, which might determine whether or not netball proceeds in its current form and proposal, or it doesn't. So somehow we need to sort of go through this process, but understand that there are going to be some other big decisions too that might determine actually the 60-40 might not be 60-40 this year, it might be 50-50 this year. And so
coming back to Councillor Carruthers' comments effectively on there is, you know, the annual plan can present options to the community in terms of what that might look like. So it could be 60-40, it could be 50-50, and with the information that supports that. So yeah, that's right.
And probably that cost, potentially, like if we just decided to do CWEM and Memorial Park, then that means we've actually got to cut transport or water or something to, you know, but that's the stuff we can consult on. But I still think, at least to start with, is getting a bit of a ranking from the staff. Like obviously, yeah, whether I just don't think we've got the time to make the framework. So if we start with you know, you guys do that, and we can sort of start thinking about that, what our framework is as to our priorities, and then that might shift things around. But I think it's sort of like what we did with this other one. It's a shopping list, and we've got X amount of money, these are the priorities, and this is where we draw the line. And you know, if we get more money, then we go down a bit further. If we get less, you know, it's take it up, you know, so.
Absolutely, and we have that. I was just looking for James because he's done a lot of work in terms of a prioritisation process that can give that ranking to support that.
With transport, fundamentally, we need to also decide, are we likely to put money into a project that we don't have subsidy for? Or with whatever NZTA have put on the table, then obviously we can then match it in the normal course of the business. There may be one or two actually where we think actually these are really important to us and we're going to do them under our own steam. But fundamentally, I think we probably started off with, unless we've got the subsidy, our funds won't necessarily be over and above that. Apart from the public safety one, which I think there was a decision the other day about road safety, wasn't there? Yeah.
The other path to that is just to reflect on some of these lists, and use Cameron Road Stage 2 as the example, is that it's got a very large number because it's just included all of the amount of funding that's been pushed into that year on it. So that could be a lesser amount, for example, on something like that. So, you know, it's not going to take the entire budget out for transport on that one project.
Well, I think we can, like, unless you've got specific things to say, I think.
Well, yeah. So I think it's important that we don't have the 45 or whatever number of projects ranked by just trying to rearrange them here. But if you recall last week when we put the paper on the NLTP impacts up, we had 5 criteria that the Transport Agency uses for their national priority ranking, and we suggest that we do the same here. 5 or 6 criteria that you between yourselves give a percentage rating, and then we rank the projects in order to meet that. And that's excluding the Durham Street, for instance. It's excluding Cameron Road Stage. Some of those projects that we have decided to 100% fund are there in this financial year anyway. So for 25-26, that doesn't have a big impact. But there may be projects that you want to fund 100%. So to your point, Marty, there may be some exceptions, but I think the cleanest way to go through this is to have a set of priorities or objectives that you want to achieve with the discretionary spend on transport. And I flicked you if we can put that slide up, Amy. Go a bit forward. Carry on. That's the one. This is a suggestion of the weightings that we can put against it, so you can take that away, have a think about whether you think that feels right or not, and then we can prioritise those projects that make up the discretionary spend, and then that's it. There might be, you might want to debate 1 or 2 projects whether they should be above or below the affordability line, but on balance there's been a process, you've agreed to that process and the weightings, and it's just a suggestion that because NZTA uses this process, it could be useful for us to do the same. We've added community in there, so we've tweaked them a little bit. So the NZTA uses safety, resilience, access, environmental and economic efficiency. We've added the middle one. Oh, yeah, sure.
In terms of the weighting that we might put the mic on, that's reflective of the current GPS. So in the implications paper that went to Council on Monday, we put a scenario together that was reflective of the current policy settings. So what you've got here is a distillation of all your strategic intent in terms of national policy and regional and local policy, and we've brought it down to these outcomes. What kind of misses out in the national policy framework is the community side of things. So we felt that was important to bring it in. So this is one of the tests. And this is a way that you can change the focus of the prioritisation methodology to make sure it picks up the right kind of projects within that list that you have in front of you today. And I think that's one of the questions and feedback pieces that we need from Council around how would you like us to proceed on this going forward. So there is some extra information in there if you need it for, after this process. But this is the part where when it says these projects are to be prioritised, we would run it through a methodology like this and then see what the priority order would come out as. So in the paper that you saw on Monday, we had done that in advance on one setting. There's an opportunity to change those settings if so desired. Staff have made an assessment to say that under the current GPS, this is what would make a difference in terms of those percentages within that list. And it would, for example, pick up projects that are more efficiency based and also the safety and resilience, which are all GPS priorities at the moment. Quite differently from the environmental access and community because they don't get picked up in the GPS. But of course, you have every right to change those percentages around and adjust the program as a result.
So as someone who was tutoring with the spreadsheet earlier on, I mean, I can see personally where I might want to play, might offend Councillor Crowther, but that's all right. So are we going to have a time or a process where we can look at some of these bigger settings rather than individual projects?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. So the proposed rollout would be that we take a methodology like this to the Vision Growth and Committee to have a paper there that explain this in a bit more detail and the implications. But then at some point when at a full council meeting, perhaps in early December, that's when the full transport program can be adopted as a list of things to do, perhaps. And I think it's more about making sure that there's a level of comfort within council about it, the prioritisation methodology and the sensitivity analysis that we can give you.
Yes.
Thinking for other groups of activities, a matrix like this might be helpful in terms of weightings and criteria, and keeps us at a relatively high level rather than picking favourites. Just a thought.
Paul.
Just in terms of timing, we're just conscious that our original intent was to get something to you to consider over Christmas into the new year. That may not be the case on that type of time frame, for example, which would just compress the February-March time frame, because we do need, from a consultation perspective, to be out in sort of the middle of March to the middle of April for consultation, which would mean that we'd be bringing the first cut of the plan to you in February of a fairly condensed time frame. I'm looking for a nod from Jeremy over there.
Let's look at transport. You've got, 23 million, for example, that we're trying to get to. So what effect do the individual projects actually have? Like, can we make some assumptions, like, that we're sort of in this 23 million from there, but not to the granular detail per project, because I'm just from a timing perspective.
Just trying to understand. We've got the list of projects, but you're not looking at the list.
Well, I guess I'm saying because we may not know the actual what the 23 million is made up of until December, it sounds like. So therefore, how much effect does that actually have on the plan if we know we're spending 23 million rather than we know we're spending 23 million on these projects? I'm just asking that question.
can I just be very like at a dummy? It's sort of at a dummy run or a. What we try to do is put the projects into a very complex corporate planning system, and that in the end, its funding and its relationships will determine. It sort of flows out into what happens with rates and debt. And with what we're bringing you at the moment, it's all based on very high-level spreadsheets. So it's quite a lot of anxiety amongst the finance team because it's a whole lot of guessing. And the longer we take to be able to load actual projects and run it properly, the more kind of risk sits with what we're telling you that it could change. So if you're giving us a guideline of 23 and we can talk to Mike and load what he's first cut priority, then it can change afterwards and that will be fine. But we would want to have a sort of a first cut of priority because we're going to be asking the business hopefully to load towards in the second half of November just to fit it with our timeframes.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah,
So
through the chair, if I could just make a comment that where it would change dramatically would be if all the funding sources changed dramatically. So if we loaded a whole lot of loan-funded projects and they were DC-funded projects, it would change the numbers quite a bit. But assuming that it doesn't, it will give you a fair indication of where your debt level, your covenant levels, and your rate levels will sit based on that.
But it is like time wise, we've got to move quickly. That's the. Yeah, Councillor Crowther.
Can you clarify the difference between, like if we have a growth project with DC funding, so I'm just thinking something, for example, under transport, Bethlehem Road, stage 3 upgrading, whatever that is, I'm not aware of what the project is, but it's growth, and then compare that to one which is a level of service, and how that sort of rolls through in terms of, I know we've got a financing issue in terms of the debt headroom, but that may be resolved to some extent in terms of if it's going to be recouped from DCs. But then I'm thinking with Bethlehem, how does that practically work?
It has a direct impact on rates because if it's growth, then it doesn't get funded necessarily from rates.
No, but I'm just trying to cover off, like with something like Bethlehem, where, like, how much of that realistically is going to be funded by non-rates in terms of, like NZTA, say that project. Like I'm aware there's low cost, low risk funding from NZTA, which is very minimal. We've got a chunk of renewals funding, but we've also got a chunk of other funding that seems to have some flexibility that might pick up some of this, I think. But I think that's, with transport, it's a bit more complex in my view, because I would not like to fund a whole lot of stuff out of rates that maybe in 2.5 years' time we kind of go, oh no, it's looking very likely we'll be able to fund it out of 51% NZTA subsidy. But on the other hand, if it's a critical project, I'd like it probably to go ahead if it's really critical and we all want to.
I think Mike can, obviously he's going to jump on there anyway, but
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of trying to answer that question, the way that we prioritise the program is to make sure that our DC funding element is one of the higher priorities. So I think if you remember from that paper, we said that things that were committed, or we had a commitment around, particularly around if we've already got a developer out there building projects and we have to pay the bills, they come out first. So the way that the program is prioritised. Now, some of the projects in that list that says full priority, we're just going to have to make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's, that those projects are actually committed, or they're going to be committed in that next year. So that's the next step for us, is to, now that we understand the limit of the upper limits, we do have to do another rerun and make sure that those projects do make it through. So if we have got a commitment from a DC perspective and we intend to build it, or the developer intends to build it within this period, then we need to make sure we have an allowance for that in the budget.
So it's going to say, I think from an NZTA perspective, and jump in Mike at any time, but that would be part of what we would bring back to you effectively, to say if these are particularly high priority projects that you want to proceed without NZTA, or do you want to look at not doing those now, or to a lesser extent, because that NZTA funding may come in the next funding round. That is part of that decision.
But I think from an annual plan perspective, the to go back to your initial point, Paul, or Catherine, is like it depends on what the project is as to where it's going to hit, because if it's a fully growth project, that has no impact on rates. Whereas if it's a level of service, that may have 100% impact on rates. So the whole project is being funded by rates. So that has a big impact if we're saying we're only going to that level of rates increases as to what mix that makes up.
Through the chair, that's kind of the point, mate. But I guess what I'm looking for is we have naturally at this high level we have a blunt thing here which says 1.5 million for a growth project, but behind that we've got a level of service component in that growth project presumably. So it might be 52% growth, and of that, DCs theoretically might be funding all of it, but practically because of the staging of Bethlehem or wherever it is, it may not end up, we may not capture all that, there might be other costs. So I guess what I'm looking at is if we ended up paying a lot for rates with no NZTA subsidy, that would be a very different scenario to if we got it all from DCs, or in fact, if this, my understanding is that still some of this could be under NZTA subsidy. Am I correct in assuming that? Yep, so that's what I'm trying to tease out is how do we, and like I say, it's different for all the other areas, but for transport, can we get more granularity around what things will actually cost the council how much, as opposed, like, not council, you know, like
So-
the ultimate, like the ratepayers will pay. Basically, that's what I'm.
So through the
I'm
chair,
simply
we can include the funding mix for the projects, which will show you what is coming from NZTA, what is coming from DCs, what is coming from loan funded debt, etc. Yep.
Of funding available.
Use up the whole budget probably on those growth ones. Well, obviously with Cameron Road, but taking out Cameron Road. But if we don't have to, then we can make a conscious.
Right, we better keep moving. So yeah, we need to prioritise then, I guess, trying to find matrices if there's any of the different sort of cost centres, I guess, to try to rank these. I think that's really the priority, isn't it?
Su-
So
Susan, Amy, do you want to just grab the slide for the main slide for waters? Yeah. For the main slide first, and then it's your show, Wally. Do you want to talk through that, Nick? Or do you want me to?
Just that there's not a lot out of the $100 million plus program. You'll see that a lot of it is committed already. So when that waterfall gets to what we've got as discretionary, if you want of a better term, there's $8 million left, and waters. That's not a lot of activity that we can make decisions on. So I think I'd quite like to trust Wally's judgment on this.
Kia ora tātou. Thanks, Nick. We've got a pretty much committed program for the year. Growth is the main driver right across the board. It's bigger than anything that we've got. We're making a $50 million saving overall, and that's coming at, it's not easy. And you'll notice that some of the program that's in the prioritisation list, if we go on to that next spreadsheet, a lot of it is transport related. So if you are playing tunes, pulling things in or out with transport, there is a further impact for water investment as well. And in some of that, we're investing earlier than what we normally would. We're prioritising the renewals with some of the big roading activities. So some of our assets are being renewed slightly ahead of what their long-term life may otherwise be. But otherwise, apart from that, we follow Transport's lead on that. So we look at our age of our assets, the condition of our assets, the performance of the assets, and all of that is taken into account with our renewals program. We've been doing a lot of planning with our transport colleagues to make sure that we have an integrated plan and investment program. And we're still optimising some of this investment program. the more time we spend planning, obviously, the more opportunities we're finding, and we have come up with some further opportunities, and we would certainly be substituting some of these projects with others to make those savings. So those were our early thoughts. We do know that we'll still make that $50 million saving, but it might look a little bit different to what's on the board at the moment, and we'll know that with a little bit more planning time, certainly in time for the annual plan.
I guess the challenge there as well comes, out of those committed projects and those that are renewals, is you get better value for money, or you can find a cheaper way to do it. Then it's more money for the next part. So that's really I think important. Yeah, Councillor Crowley.
Yeah, I just question. I noticed Turret Road strategic water main link is for prioritisation. I presume that's tying in with that roading project. Am I correct?
At the moment, it's out of our program.
Yeah, I know, but as in, if it were in the program, would it be tying in with the work, or is it completely
Yes.
separate? Right. Yep.
Correct.
So I guess that would use up the 8 million. I'm just, let's say that scenario plays out. Let's say because we want to go ahead with 15th turret, therefore it seems to make sense we go ahead with that. Then can you describe, and however you want to describe it, what the impact would be to, delay, defer, remove all the rest of those projects on that list?
Yeah, if you look at those top three, they're all transport related, and it comes to about 21.8 million,
Yeah.
roughly. So if they're all to go ahead, we have to find another 21.8 million, either from somewhere,
Yeah.
or we really stop some growth somewhere, perhaps.
Well,
it's getting to the point where it's going to impact on growth if we're getting into those sort of numbers.
Yeah. I guess another way of rephrasing it is are we going to have an adverse impact in terms of our whole organisational plan to deliver in those growth areas because of that?
I wouldn't know about the entire organisational
No,
plan.
but I mean, well, in the wider strategic, because it sounds like it is. And I guess what I'm highlighting is I absolutely appreciate the finance team having to start somewhere, and you've got an incredibly difficult job. I don't know how you can do this, but it strikes me, just as soon as I saw this the other day, I thought that 60-40 split's not quite right, because just a personal initial gut feeling is 8's too low, because I think, right, 8's Turret Road, we need some more in there, because as much as I have spoken publicly that I'm not in favour of putting a whole lot of resourcing into growth at the expense of other things, I think there's also a reality check that sort of goes, that formula runs the risk of really derailing some important stuff for the city, I think, based on my initial hit. And so it's just, that'd be just a bit of feedback at this stage, that I'm a little concerned that this is the first little red flag that I see in terms of we might be going too low here, which means we have to go even bigger cuts elsewhere. I'm aware of what I'm saying, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got to figure that out as we go. I think Paul wants to talk, but we do need to, just keep going, because...
Very, very briefly, I would think, the one thing that we are conscious of, and I can't say of any level of confidence at this point in time, except that we are most likely to be more favourably seen in terms of growth expenditure moving through to LGFA bespoke covenant increases. So that will occur prior to our annual plan going out for consultation. So we do need to work to remain agile through that process, that we might put something in if that was to occur. It's not going to be game changing or massive or things like that, but it may be in those sort of situations that does give some capacity.
And perhaps just in response to your question about the plan, at the moment, the plan for managing particularly the growth is solid. It's just a matter of prioritisation and timing. And if most of those projects don't start or get off the ground next year? Well, it'll be the year after, or the year after, or the year after, depending what happens in the transport space and depending what's available through LGFA. So I don't think the investment, the infrastructure investment around particularly the growth and renewals, it's not a plan that we need to revisit necessarily. It's just about what we do when, in coordination with what. Oh yeah, the 60-40 is really just it's just a starting point for a conversation. Yeah.
I think we're next, are we? So community infrastructure, and you can see by the list in front of you, if you've got it in front of you, that community infrastructure is so much more than spaces and places. It includes the historic village, it includes furniture, it includes, there's even dog traps in there. So it's a combination of a lot of activities within the organisation that doesn't fit into the sort of the infrastructure activity. So, I mean, we're in the same boat as everybody, you know, we've got to save some money. We obviously believe that we deliver what, you know, the nice things for the community, but we do have to, I'm going to pick up on Glenn's point, we do have to play the organisation game, and we all need to understand and focus on what's important for the organisation. I've got Amanda here who might like to add, but I just want to say one more thing, is that from our perspective, we've got, I think, probably still about 150 projects in this list. When you look at the AIPs, there's a lot of smaller projects underneath them. So I guess what would give us a good steer is when, after we've had that discussion, or Jen and Kev have that discussion around netball and what we're going to do around active reserves. That really sets the platform for us on you know, how we prioritise the rest of our budget. So, Amanda, did you want to add anything? Are you still there? No? So happy to answer any questions. Moving right along. Yep. Thank you, Steve.
So Morris.
So through annual plan process, we're going to try and create some headroom here, but the community's going to come in, we're going to consult with them, and they're going to come back with their list of things that they want.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're tight, that's really hard to achieve. So perhaps we need to go even further to create room to accommodate what the community wants as well. Notwithstanding that they may be prepared to pay more for it as well. A lot of that's in your area, Barbara.
Mm. I think that what we did recognise when I came into the role about 4 years ago now, is that community infrastructure has, you know, paid the price for many, many years. So a lot of this is, particularly in the renewals, is catch up. If we do look at the active reserve, moving out of freeing up Blake Park, I guess we're just going to have to look at sweating some assets a little bit more, which will be hard because I think they've been sweated for a long time. But it will be about prioritising those things, like all of our colleagues will need to do.
This is a very collegial meeting compared to the long-term plan process we went through. Was it about 2 years ago, 18 months ago? where the general managers all lined up, and yeah, it was like, how would you describe it?
Hunger Games.
Yeah, no, yeah, we've come a very long way.
I was trying to be really nice here, but really community facilities is the most important. So.
There's three smaller groups left, effectively. CFO group, which is mine, digital and sustainability and waste. So CFA Group fundamentally is airport and marine precinct. We know the issues with the marine precinct, and we need to work through those. We're well aware of that. The balance is the airport. The good news is the airport is it doesn't touch rates, but it does touch our debt numbers. So that is very much driven based on demand and what's happening through the airport. So we can prioritise within that.
Technology is a harder one, but similar to transport, there are principles. The first is keeping the organisation safe. The next is looking after what we have, so maintaining that technology investment we have. And then you get into the discretionary questions. So we'll have a council paper on this in a week or so, but challenge is to ensure we collect revenue consistently, and then the investment we want to put in to support business change, whether it's an idea that's come from a staff member that has a business case, or the need to respond to change as we go through different versions of ourselves. So, but you typically will find every year that demand for technology will go up, and we've just got to balance that against, doing things manually and doing what we can afford. So we'll talk about that more on the 12th, but open to any questions about technology. Okay.
We also just recognise that we need to have the conversation on balanced budget, particularly because it has large funding implications on that activity. Sustainability and waste. Dan.
Oh yeah, so the the headline there is actually quite similar to the water space, where there's not a lot of discretionary, if that's the term, spend, and by the time we have picked the ones that are in the green list of projects that we actually have to do for whatever reason, there are two. One is closed landfill, and the other one is bins. Well, either we're under consent conditions to do that expenditure, or contractually tied to spending it on bins, for instance. Once we've done that, that's the spend gone basically. But Dan might have some more detail on that for us.
So just from that, I'm interested. So why, like, if we have to do those, why are they not committed, or is that just is committed that we've made a decision and committed to them all?
Yeah, well, but we actually speak of them as committed in a sense, because we can't not do them.
Because I'm lucky last, I thought I would blow you away with a complex list of projects, obviously. And you'll see that the top one is the closed landfill, which we've submitted the consent application for last week. So we're still working through those options, and that process to some degree will determine what interventions we'll need to put in place. And so that's stopping leachate from getting into the harbour, which is quite a risky process for us. And then the waste facilities redevelopment is part of that paper that you'll see on the 9th of December around our proposed approach to what we invest in infrastructure. And an interesting one is the corporate sustainability projects are those projects where we've committed to meet our emission reduction targets as Tauranga City Council, which affords us a 2% discount across our loan book through climate action loans and LGFA. So while they're up there as potentially needing to be prioritised, it does come with a financial knock if we don't achieve that, and we have to pay LGFA back for the discount that we've received to date. Happy to take any questions.
Just for clarity, the loan is 2 basis points. I wish it was 2%. But
2 basis points.
And this.
Councillor Crowther.
Are there any, this is not so much for you, Dan, but just Paul, are there any others in those three categories, the CFO, corporate and sustainability, that would be effectively committed if we, if you had committed categories there?
Do you want to just bring that list back up, Susan? Just show it on.
Oh, you've got the one there, that's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, like effectively, we've got, like, say for for sustainability and waste, we've got 5 million for prioritisation, and we've actually within that 5 million we've got 6.7 committed, 6.8 or whatever it is. So therefore, we're already 1.7, 1.8. We've got to cut elsewhere on top of what's said. But I'm just wondering, is there anything in corporate and digital, say, that that you'd kind of go, well, there's no way you could cut bulk fund OPEX IT completely, so, is 12 enough? Do we actually, are we committed to 15? Are some of those other projects committed? Because I'm just aware maybe not all the committed are highlighted.
I think that we are bringing a more detailed paper to the 12th of November meeting on digital, which will highlight some of the risks that, in particular, that sit within digital, because I think if our Chief Digital Officer was here, he'd say that there are a number of risk areas that exist in the digital area that and some of them are about getting off legacy systems that are now have very limited support that we carry risk on, and that is what we want to bring to you, so that just so that it's clear as to our plan effectively, just to confirm that. But I think it would be fair to say that digital program has been reduced to less than a comfortable amount, effectively, in terms of addressing those things.
So through the chair, I guess what would be helpful, certainly to me, would be for the meeting next week. I know you won't have time to do a whole another cut on it, but to say take Tamonga closed landfill, curbside bins, maybe sort of either stick them in a committed category or somehow otherwise blue colour code them or something. But also, if there is anything else anywhere in that list that you kind of go, this is virtually committed, or you've got because I guess that's what we really want to know, because to me that instantly sort of says we haven't got 5 million there, we've got minus 1.6 from somewhere else as the starting point. And
I think that's a lot around the prioritisation, which we can do. It's just I don't want to run out of time because we've got to go through balanced budgets and the operating. So absolutely that can be part of that prioritisation. So we balanced budgets next, or
So I'll hand over to Catherine on this one, and between the two of us we'll work through, and Tracy, the balanced budget. So you see it starts at the 64, which is the 26 years, so that's what we're focusing on.
Could we just go back up to the key financials slide first? Might help. Okay, so I'll just take you through this one. So, as I said, we're not working in the model at the moment, so there's a lot of unknowns to provide the key financials. So what we've got on this table is what the LTP was saying, which was basically a rates increase of 12.5%, bringing us to that 373, capital of 457, capital subsidies of 85, and a debt level of 1.6 billion, and 272% debt to revenue. So everything's getting quite tight. I've noticed I've provided 3 debt to revenue ratios, which is confusing, I know. One of them is what we talk about in our financial strategy, and we say we're LGFA, but LGFA has a very loose covenant at present. So technically, that is to our advantage probably this year, as we get very close to those limits, and that they had never envisaged things like Tauriko West transactions or even IFF. So the very loose covenant does call that revenue. So that's why I've sort of shown you below really what LGFA, when they do their assessment at the end of the year, they don't have us right on the border quite so much, but it isn't. It's sort of one-off in a couple of years, and it's not really what we talk about as a genuine debt to revenue, but it would save us having to repay if we did go a bit higher, so it's not quite such a high risk. That's why I've got the 3 in there. And then I've started to include a debt to revenue ratio if we used operational revenue only, based around that bespoke covenant, because if LGFA do a bespoke covenant, they haven't done the work on that yet, but I think they will look very closely at what revenue that they include. And on that basis, it's just important to know that we are over the 300% debt to revenue on operational revenue already, just so that we don't think we've got huge capacity if we suddenly get a bespoke covenant. We have some capacity, but it's limited. So then we've just said, what do we know now? And I've provided on that right-hand column some of the factors that have changed. The debt probably overall is up slightly, and again, this is all just manual calculation, so we think we're at about 1.65 billion. We're working on that 500 million capital, and our debt to revenue will pop up, breaching our financial strategy covenants, which was set at 280 for the year, but still, just because of that sort of quirk of what revenue we can include, would be at about 270, so we wouldn't technically breach LGFA, although hopefully we'll be by that stage applying for some sort of bespoke covenant. The relationship, I've sort of coloured those 4 cells because they do show a relationship. So obviously debt to revenue is our biggest constraint, and there's a few levers there, and I've put kind of if rates were, and I know no one's talked about rates at 8.1%, but it's just sort of an example of you couldn't go that low probably and stay within covenants. So I've used that as a worst case. At 500 of capital and that much debt, you would be really right up on the line. So that's the purpose of that table, just to give you an idea of those relationships. The next graph we've shown is just, and again, it's I don't know if you've seen this before presented in this way, but our capital debt has been affected by a loss of capital subsidy compared to what we expected in the LTP, and that's a big part is transport, but there's also quite a lot through that community infrastructure, the assumptions we're making to support Te Manautaki and I guess aquatics. I'm not quite sure of how that breaks down, but those have been revised down for the year, so that's part of what's affecting our debt levels. And then we move on to the year's operating deficits and conversations about the balanced budget. So, on the table I showed you, I had what I called a reframed operating budget deficit, and we explain that a little bit in this table. So actually the LTP has a variance, a deficit between that operating expenditure and total revenue of 64 million, and we've broken out the items that drive that, or that drive things that we, in our previous conversation, talked about whether we would reframe it and exclude those. So the first is depreciation costs related to NZTA funding of renewals. So NZTA fund 51% of renewals, so we have never, as a council, funded that portion of depreciation, because if the road is wearing out, they're a partner with us, they pay that 51%, we only pay the 49%, so we've only ever tried to fund that 49%. And capitalised DC interest, so we've calculated it's approximately 19 million, might be a little bit more than that, that's a pretty high level calculation. So we're saying there's 37 million of that item that is, you may not call your operating deficit. I'm not sure where you've landed on that since the presentation. And I've noted that DC revenue, which funds interest, capitalised interest, because it's paying back that DC reserve, it's paying back the capitalised interest and the original principal, that is budgeted to flow through at about 30 30 odd million next year, so it more than covers that interest. So again, if we're excluding that DC revenue, yeah, how appropriate is it to say, well, we're going to have to somehow cover our costs on that DC interest? So I'm not quite sure where you landed on that after our presentation of reframing, but that would be helpful to know. But we've sort of worked, assuming that that's reframed and that the operating deficit becomes the 27.
Sorry, Paul, yeah.
Oh, just to confirm, I guess what we would like to be able to actually understand from council is that whether that is okay, or whether you would like to see that as an options paper on the 12th as to what we could do differently in there. And those options would be, for example, we could fully fund depreciation on all.
So that's the next slide. We'll get to that one.
No, it's not. Not quite. So we could fully fund what that would mean effectively is we could look to find that saving elsewhere, which would mean that we'd have to try and that rates could go up by that amount, which would effectively be a form of debt retirement because we would get the money from NZTA and we would get the money from our ratepayers. So that's a question that we just are seeking clarification on, is whether that's same with DC interest effectively in there. They could be options that we can bring back to you, or it can be an adjusted operating deficit, depending on how council see that.
I'm just interested on that operating deficit. That includes the high level number. That includes like DC revenue invested assets, or
No, it's just using that. If you, I don't remember the soccer, but we divide it by what we call day-to-day operational revenue and then asset revenue. So DC revenue, we were not including in that deficit. We have a surplus when you include those revenues.
okay, no, that's yeah.
The interest is effectively going through the expense line, but the revenue comes later through the development contribution line.
So just in that I'm just getting clear. So that's basically the operating deficit is effectively the rates and the user fees and the NZTA. That's your operating income, and then you've taken everything out, and that's what you end up. Yeah, because wasn't that 103?
It was 103, went down to 84. Oh, or other way around. I can't remember.
It's 103 for the current year, 64 for next year.
Oh, okay.
So some of it was like Tauriko Western balances. There were other things driving the deficit this year.
Yeah. So, well, like my personal view is, yeah, Tauriko West funding, because that is effectively capital nature, and I accept that as capital nature, so that can come out. I think, yeah, I'm coming around to the NZTA funding. I have understood how that works, so I'm probably comfortable with that. And the capitalised DC interest, so that's effectively where it's going to be. That's going to be paid off by DCs over time. So we don't have the DCs in our calculation. So therefore, I'm quite happy to take that out.
And they would be in later years as well.
Because it's because it's kind of a timing and a fair for fair. So that's probably quite comfortable with that. Yeah, sorry. And
no, I mean,
Jen.
I think that I'm also getting around on the depreciation. The only thing is we know NZTA changes the rules, so have we ever been in a situation where assets have been funded 51% by NZTA and then the renewals have not?
We've actually improved over time, to be honest, because they used to be funded a lower amount, and it actually has dropped over time.
So that's not
so it's gone in our favour to date.
Okay, so that renewals just aren't one of the things that changes because the government changes. They're all coming great. Okay. Therefore,
the percentage is the one thing that has changed through governments, but it's gone in our favour.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Can we have the next slide? Thanks. So, sorry.
yeah, correct. now we probably get into the controversial stuff.
Yeah, this is the hard part. So
Sorry.
Sorry to cut you off. Can you just clarify though, when there is, I'm still a bit confused, because when there's a shortfall in DCs, so you have a DCs for a particular greenfield area, then there's a shortfall, and then I've heard in previous council meetings, with previous councils, that the interest cost gets paid by ratepayers, as well as some of the shortfall in DCs itself. So at what point, I'm still a bit confused about at what point that hits the operating budget.
when council makes a decision to transfer growth debt because it's assessed that there is no more ability to collect the remainder of the money. So that's happened on a couple of occasions, and but even something like Bethlehem, they're still sitting with a reserve balance because they believe there'll be more development coming in that area over time. So that would not shift, that would stay within the DC covered capital.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm certainly comfortable with the broad direction. I'm just aware that I've looked at the last sort of 6 years, we've got, like when you try to look at real-time scenarios, and I know that's not the ultimate way of what we're getting to, but we're always kind of running on 40-ish%, give or take. 41% is the average for us of where you have the DCs and then you have the growth expenditure, and there's other factors play into it. So all I'm aware of is that there's a lot of growth, and the more you can kind of put it in at this point, the more you don't have to make a sudden lurch somewhere down the track and kind of go, right, now we're going to stick it on a debt retirement levy or just bring it in at that point, don't we? That's my understanding.
Yeah, probably just a better question in that. So that 19 million, that can be directly put onto DCs. Like that's, yeah. So we should have like whether we actually get it back or not, but we should be able to get it back.
Yeah. In a perfect world, we'd recover the full 19 million. We know that it's not perfect, and we do have some within there, but under existing legislation, it's the maximum that you can effectively charge through the DC now. So we can charge more to ratepayer now and avoid charging in the future, or when we transfer it, it's charged to the ratepayer. But we can't put any more onto the DC charge because you can only recover your actual cost. It's in there, the capital cost only. Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't speak for the PRRA.
Well, yeah. Well, I think you're
Or give an answer.
this. I'm just thinking of this in my head. I think this is more growth pays for growth. Otherwise, you're going to get the ratepayer to pay for effectively DC interest. Because if we take that out, we then have a bigger deficit that we then have to rate more. Yeah. So.
All I'm saying is it'd be nice to work in reality, whatever that is, as opposed to, because we always have shortfalls, we always do that to ratepayers. So long as I'm just struggling to hold it all in my head about how this is all, like at the end of it, to get back to the Mayor's initial comment, maybe it was at Smart Growth, but or here, where it's like if we can see the big picture OPEX for, say, a greenfield development, and if we had great comfort that growth would pay for growth, I'd be totally cool with this. But I'm just aware that at some point, they're going to pay anyway, I think. That's my observation and what's been said in previous council meetings.
This does, though, optimise or maximise the opportunity for growth to pay for growth. And anything less, I think you're undermining that principle.
Yep. So we'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, so this basically deals with the remaining 27 million, or I think it looks like 26 is a bit of rounding. So digital software as a service. So it was only 2 years ago, up until 2 years ago, all the sort of digital development that was kind of making things work in the organisation, implementing a piece of software, getting the connections, etc., was capital. And it was budgeted in 23 as capital, but then a technical advice came out for Audit New Zealand that we weren't allowed to do that, didn't fit with the standard, and we were required to identify it as operational. And it's happened like that ever since, and we've started this financial year in the debt retirement associated with that. It's over about, I'm pretty sure it's an average about 7 years that we're retiring that debt through the digital budget. So if you look at that first line, digital software as a service net loan funded, Tracy put this together, probably should talk to it, but it's a net of 13 because there's 4 million of debt retirement offsetting, which is we collect rates to retire the debt, offsetting the current year's budget spend of about 16 million. That is that sort of bulk fund work done by digital for the business. That's budgeted at 16 million. So that's kind of, so we've just sort of netted it out. City development. Okay.
So this one, yeah, we just need to get comfortable, I guess, on this one, because so do we know what the total for digital SaaS is?
It would have been 17 million.
So
would be that would no, that's the SaaS, so that's the OPEX effect in there. I think we've got around 2 million this year of actual CapEx, and that would be more these things.
Yeah. So where I guess how I look at this is what is the cost every year for the next 10 years, that's operational, right? So it might be 16 million, but is 10 of that if we finished all the development and it's working, that we still pay 10 million, because there must be a number that is every year.
I'll have a go, and if we take that 17 million number as broadly, and Alistair can jump in if it's 17 million is the total spend per annum effectively, yeah. So in the next financial year we're going to have, because we've put that as debt funded and retiring that debt over that 7-year period, there'll be 4 million of revenue coming in from ratepayers or user fees to support that $17 million spend. Hence there'll be $13 million net going through the operational line. So at a gross level it would show $4 million of revenue, $17 million of operating expense. The following year, if we have another $17 million, that would be a further $4 million going through the revenue line. So we would have $8 million going through the revenue line, and $17 million, i.e. a net 9 million effectively going through there. And so after 7 years, you've effectively got $17 million going through the revenue line and $17 million going through the expense line. Is it?
But it's 17 million a year. That doesn't change.
Well, that's assuming the program for digital is $17 million per annum, yeah, as broadly speaking the number for digital. Which so there's almost two questions in there. There is the quantum of the program and what we spend on digital, and then the funding treatment for digital. If we were to increase that program to say 25 million, then it would take longer to get to a balance effectively of the revenue line unless you put more money through.
I guess if we're doing development every year, to me it's that's what if we're going to be doing development every year for the next 20 years, that's what the cost is, and it really is an OPEX. Even if there's some development, but if that's the actual cost per year, then
it is OPEX, no doubt about. The accounting treatment, the advice is that it goes through the operational expenditure line. The question is on the funding line, how we treat that, and we treat it through either going through as revenue, i.e. coming from rates or user fees, or from debt. And this transition that's happening because of the way it's treated is what's causing this imbalance for a period of time. Now, the option would be we could, if we wanted to balance it out in any one year, we expenditure goes down or rates goes or revenue goes up as the two things to do it. So we could say if we wanted to still do $17 million, rates could go up to $17 million, or we could say pull out another $17 million of expenditure across the organisation so that doesn't occur effectively within there. But we'd have to work through the consequences of actually doing that as well. So they're the options that sort of sit there. So it's probably, so I guess what I'm saying is that the way it's treated means it's going through the operational expenditure line, and then and we can bring this back in the paper around the 3 or 4 options effectively how we would fund that, ranging from you charge rates for it, and the reason we've sort of not recommended that in the past is to have a view of that you're still providing a benefit for ratepayers this year, next year, the year after, and the year after, etc.
But
So we're trying to smooth
every
that.
year.
Yeah, and it's this transition that's causing a problem.
But you're always going to be throwing it into the future.
Well, except if you've got a constant amount that you increase your amount of debt retirement each year, it will smooth over the life of those assets over 7 years.
Because after the 7 years, the first lot of debt drops off. You're not retiring.
Yeah,
after
so
7 years, you paid it back.
You might have 4 million this year, have 8 million, then you have 12 million, then you have eventually 17 million of revenue going through to match the expenditure.
Yeah,
Struggling with this one too. So if you were,
I should do my spreadsheet.
if the policy hadn't changed and we still capitalised the development, what depreciation rate would be using on software?
On average over 7 years, which is why we've picked the same amount to try and
Is
keep
it over
that.
7 years software?
We chose some like
It's an average
Yeah.
number that.
so a big ERP would I think we went up to about 12, but actually our existing ERP lasted for 20 years. It's been scary, but it's lasted.
But not an ERP, it just like normal software development. Average of 7 years?
Yeah, local government isn't that dynamic. The shifting of
Paying 17 million a year for it, you need to be quite dynamic, I think.
the growth rate of the council and the amount of technology change correlates, but in terms of the big underlying platforms, the way we collect revenue, I think the system has been in place 20 years, and that ecosystem, it goes to the ratepayer, it goes to the invoice, it goes to the animal, it goes to most of the consenting property. So that single platform is a huge part of our organisation. That's 20 years. So when we talk about averaging, that is a large amount of cost. So as we need to get off that system, which accounts for a large proportion of the 17, and the CE has been asking to get off the system for a few years, the Jim, who you would have met, the guy who strikes the rates, has said, we need to stay on it for another 20 because it's very hard. It's like a big banking system that's sitting in the back corner of the bank.
Okay, so can you share the spreadsheet so we can just understand?
Just to be clear, it's my spreadsheet. So it's very simple.
Well, it's just so I'm trying to like if it's 17 like million a year now for the next 7 years, whatever, and then it drops down to 10, then how I would say that is you've got 10 of OPEX because that's the ongoing cost, and you've got 7 of capital. That's how I would break it down effectively. You know, like I don't think because it's not going to free. Like we're not going from 17 million per year to 0. In 7 years' time, it's not going to be 0. It's still going to be 17 million a year. So therefore, and if it's in 10 years, is it still 17 million?
Well, it will probably be more. In which case, you'll still have on the treatment I just described, there would still be an imbalance of the budget of a small amount, which would recognise the difference between the amount that you're spreading over that because each year you're spreading it over 7 years, so you're increasing the amount that's going through the revenue.
But are we
line.
spreading 17 million off?
We're spreading whatever we spend per annum. So in this current year, if we spend 17 million, we spread that 17 million over 7 years. If we next year we spend another 17, we spread that over 7 years. So so we'd be effectively funding the debt repayment on 17 million from this year, and then next year we'd be funding another debt repayment on that 17 million.
Yeah, And then, yeah. So what? Yeah, well, Marty gave me the question, but what have we been paying average over the last 5 years?
I'd have to check, to be honest. In terms
Well, yeah. Well, I think we're 14 or 15.
Oh, in terms of the total cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're around that.
Yeah, about 15.
About
I think
15 million.
Yeah.
I think actually we were in the 20s last year. We were quite a lot higher because the cost has gone up, and the budget actually was cut, and it's caused a bit of
yes
consequence.
And we replaced the core part of the ERP through an early part of that. So yeah, it would have been higher.
This to me feels very capital and that it shouldn't.
I 100% agree.
But it shouldn't be. Sorry. No, I think it's actually OPEX. Sorry. No,
I 100% agree.
No. It seemed because it's an ongoing cost and it's similar every year. It's very much an OPEX, and I understand smoothing it, but I just think, well, we can't say that this is a deficit.
I understand, and I've probably misled a little bit in terms of using the word smoothing. It's effectively bringing in the debt retirement, so it's transition, and it's so what's happening is we're not using debt straight away as much because we're bringing in rates over a period of time. So we're over a 7-year period, we're moving the balance of revenue up and debt down over that period to do it.
But we need to fund this every year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right, and at the extreme to fund it every year, we'd say, well, we've got to spend 17 million. It goes through the OPEX line. We need $17 million of revenue to actually fund it. That's an option that sits there.
Yeah.
But we've said that because there's a enduring benefit of this software as a service over a longer period, that the ratepayer today shouldn't pay 17 million. They should pay a portion of it because the ratepayer next year should pay a portion, and so on.
Yeah, but then it just keeps stacking up.
Well, it does, but we're increasing the amount that we bring from the ratepayer each year as well. And will that catch up? Which catches up over that 7 years.
Councillor Morris.
Yeah.
So the way software is changing, though, we're not buying the individual product. So if you're buying the product and it lasts for 7 years or 20 years, then you can make the argument to the resident that it's benefiting them over that period of time. But if you're buying it as a service, it is. If you don't pay the invoice next year, it's not available to you. So the benefit doesn't accrue to the next year, one would think. I mean, that's just a...
That's correct, and the invoice, paying for that right to use it each year is OPEX, and we budget it as OPEX. But when you get in something like rates, SAP, you don't get a functioning thing. You get like an empty box, and you've got to put all the walls and bits inside the box and decide how other bits of information flow into it and what your people do based on your processes, and all that work you do once and it lasts for 15 years or however long, and so it benefits future generations. But sorry, Tracy, you've been dying to say that. And so what we've done, yes, it's probably short in terms of our debt retirement, but because we have constrained debt, we tried to get the debt retirement in a shorter time frame. That's why we did the 7 years. So yeah, it's not the same as depreciation. If it was a depreciated capital asset, it would be a bit higher. But
Councillor Morris.
I always have one of these sort of epiphanies, and that turns out not to be true, and I go home sad. But the budget here, software as a service, isn't for your annual subscription stuff. It includes software a package which you've bought. Like, I've gone to the warehouse and grabbed one of the old copies of Microsoft Office and banged it on there, as part of my software. This is stuff that's not invoiced annually. This is like the traditional old way of
Where?
It's what we've built around that software.
Yeah,
So we do
so
the
that's
building.
These systems, for example, like we've got SAP
Yes.
being used for rates. It's that. Yeah.
They're modules that we buy to enable. Yeah, they do.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah, but then I guess the issue you've got though is that's where I can't get my head around it, because we're saying we're going to pay 17 every year because we're always developing.
That's exactly right, and I think on Tuesday next week, on Tuesday next week, I think we'll bring a list to you where we're saying, unfortunately, IT was the poor cousin through the last long-term plan process because we were going through an IT management change. Alistair was new to the table, and when Ken arrived and had a look in the cupboard, it was empty, pretty much. And so there was about $15 million of IT packages, software as a service, that we believed we needed to bring in. Because of, I guess, the current constraints, the executive got together last week and said, well, actually, we can't introduce another $15 million worth of OPEX into the system this year. And we were going to make some reasonably big decisions, but felt that in order, before we did that, we bring them to you. So I'm just sort of, there is a whole lot of stuff, and this development never stops, to be honest.
Okay,
Yeah.
So
let's just park that one for now. So, sorry.
Just through the chair, if I could suggest, like, we can bring and distribute it before the meeting effectively, the table which will show effectively the, which I think might help is in terms of actually the cash flows and the breakdown into what is debt and what is rates over a full life cycle.
Yeah.
And that that might help this conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
If that would work.
So anyway, so that city development net loan fund.
So city development is the activity that works for the city centre, obviously, and there is OPEX. It basically is an activity that just builds capital assets that will in the end go to other GMs, and at the time it was set up to do that rather than have it dealt with as GMs. The governance at the time, which is the commissioners, said, well, because it's only related to assets, it shouldn't be funded as a operational activity, it should be loan funded. So that's why that sits there. So it is definitely operational activity, but it is associated with developing assets. So it could include things like communication, efforts you make to raise early planning and design, consultation, engagement, it's that sort of stuff. So it is OPEX, but it is loan funded at present. So, and the net impact of that is 3 million, which if you bought that and said no longer loan funded OPEX, we'll rate fund it, it's a 3 million, 1% rates impact if it was on top of everything else.
So again, is that every year, or is it going to stop in 5 years' time?
It'll stop. It'll stop at the time of the delivery of the project. Yeah.
It can be lumpy. Yep. You can see it.
Yeah.
In other years, but it's not a continual.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really the key to me. Like if it's an OPEX that happens every year, then that's definitely OPEX. If it's we're doing something and then it stops, then that I can accept capital for that. So yeah,
I'm not. I mean, I don't want to spend any contingency, but arguably at the end of any project like that, if that funding was still, if that loan is still outstanding, you could choose to pay it off at that point if there was surplus in any contingencies. Just an idea. But.
So other planning net loan, that's like plan changes and stuff, is it? Or?
Yes, and that, so it happened a long time ago. So I guess in terms of the way that you're thinking about things, it does seem to happen every year, but at the time it wasn't. We were trying to keep costs down, and there was a new growth area or a city plan change or something that was going to happen and cause a spike. And so a decision was made to loan fund it. And then the following year, a new growth area was going to open up. And so a decision was made to loan fund it. So we have got ourselves into a position over time, and Tracy might head somewhere there, how much we're actually spending each year in that planning space and loan funding it and debt retiring it. And it's gone to a point that's almost at that point of maturity that Paul's talked about, that we probably could just eventually clear those loans and kind of pivot to a OPEX funding. So if you got the... Oh, bad luck.
So while that's happening, your classic example is what we saw today, where Nathan York was talking about 20 years ago, the Wairaki plan change, and then they're delivering the supermarket 20 years later. Did the planning 20 years ago.
And if you were to do a city plan might cost you $15 million over a 2-year or 3-year period, but it lasts for 10 years. Yeah.
The first I can remember of this happening was probably 16, 17 years ago. We had a city plan change. I think it was $8 million or something. Yeah.
Councillor Crowther.
Can you, to me this seems really OPEX-y. I'm sort of very comfortable with just getting rid of this as a starting point until someone can prove to me that we shouldn't. And because there seem to be plenty of other lumpy things that councils do, and decisions that I've seen in the last few years made, which are bigger scale than this, which I've sort of thought, well, that's all related to X, which is CapEx, but it's not treated any differently. It's still within an operating budget. So I guess I'm really, is there any reason why we shouldn't just say, let's just stop this, which is I think what you suggested, Catherine, is a possibility, because to me it seems like the best practice would be just to treat it as OPEX and just deal with it as we need to within the OPEX budget.
Yeah, the two things that traditionally have occurred to be treated differently is, one is the quantum of it and the longevity that it provides in terms of benefit. They're the two things. So I was talking to Steve, 15 years ago we did a city plan change that was, I think, about $8 million at the time, and that lasted 10 years. Now, if we put it through the OPEX line, that would have been $8 million of more rates that year effectively, but the city plan lasted for a number of years, so it was pushed over time. That's where it came from. I think what we're suggesting for these smaller amounts is, let's just run them through OPEX, because they are OPEX, and if we can fund them through that, there's no benefit. But I guess what we're trying to balance that. If it creates a benefit over a longer period, then it's fairer for the ratepayer of today and next year and the year after to contribute to the funding of that.
And because she's not here, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's sort of talked about that whole thing of staff time on various CapEx projects, amongst other things. So I guess my question would be, can't you use that argument that, like, when Christine and Andy and everyone are doing all their work on Tariko, shouldn't that be at that cost centre as well? I'm struggling to kind of see what's the difference with that kind of OPEX and this kind of OPEX.
Again, it's the quantum and the regularity of that.
Is this is legacy though, or?
No,
this is
current. It's current this year, but we are looking at next year, definitely presenting an option for any new growth areas that we would start to try and do the rates funding option. But this year's budget does have any new growth areas, so it sits in certain cost centres, and they code to those ones are loan funded, so they've got to work out.
If the direction of council that we can put through into the paper is that, by default these are OPEX and funded as traditional OPEX, a decision could be made at the time of, if that was uncomfortable, effectively to actually make a different decision on that line item. So if, for example, we put this through and it's $3 million, it goes through the OPEX line, but the following year it's 15 million because we've got to do some huge plan change or something, then that decision could go to council to say, let's look at the treatment of that then.
We use that as OPEX, but so it doesn't come out of there. Yeah, and then sorry, we're just at pace. So cash activities, surpluses.
So, do you want to talk to?
Just to actually track back a little bit to that planning, I have actually found how we got to that 3 million. So it's actually a $10 million expense, but a $7 million debt retirement in that year. So it's a net 3. So the expenditure is quite meaty. So we might find that if you decided to turn that off, you might find we are now having to fund $10 million of expenditure next year.
We look at it on a case by case basis. If it is those chunky 10 millions, then they potentially do get put into that. But if it's because I'm guessing that you know some years you have a lot and others. That's right. That's exactly right. So.
Right, cash activity surpluses and deficits. So some of our cash activities are forecast to perform very well in the 2026 financial year, particularly the airport, and there will be surpluses in the water supply activity as well. And on the other hand, some of them are projected to not perform quite so well. The net is a $4 million surplus between the lot of them, and that forms part of the imbalance and always will. Because they're cash activities, there is no requirement to balance those back to zero in a given year.
So in current and previous year, you saw some of those activities in larger deficits, which is why they were contributing towards the deficit, but they're now rectified back into surplus.
The target with the cash activity is always to make sure the pricing, the user fees, is modelled to cover its costs, but not to make a big profit. So the problem with that, not aiming for surplus, is you can risk falling below.
Yeah, and then I guess this underfunded depreciation, I'm just interested to understand that, because again, I feel like revaluations happen all the time. So it's, yeah.
So they do. I just got some figures before. I want to see if I can open. But transportations, revals and new assets moved them up. I think from about 14.5 million over 5 years to 36. So they're quite big movements. In that, that's a depreciation that flowed through from all those revals and the new assets. So it's a big movement. And it was a couple of years ago that we were also, again, with the council trying to balance that kind of pressure of rates increases and expenditure increases in transportation, which had some very big jumps in its operational activities. We did some benchmarking, and there was submission from Nick and the activity manager at the time that we needed a lot more money to be put into repairs and maintenance and things like that. And so a decision was made to fund that initially through non-funding and to bring that back to balance. So that is certainly a priority to fully fund transport, and we will aim to do that in this next annual plan. That'll certainly be part of the proposal to bring, because it's not good for the reserve, obviously, to or good practice not to fund that, our share of depreciation. But that's kind of how that transport one happened, and there were just some minor, obviously minor not quite catching up in spaces and places and stormwater that would have come through timing of revals and what that did that we didn't kind of pick up in time in our budget. So those are relatively minor. Transport's a big one, but the other one's quite minor, and we would expect to remedy that in the annual plan.
Through the chair, touching a lot of wood, we have been through a very cost inflationary infrastructure environment for a number of years. Again, touching wood, I would hope that that's not the case, so we don't see as bigger revaluation movements moving forward.
Yeah, I guess, I'm just uncomfortable not funding depreciation, and that's... So I guess where we get from this is, depending on that SAS is I see it is talking about a balanced budget. It's finding that either that 27 million or 14, depending on how we treat that SAS. But that's our number, I guess. Would be my comment. Because this stuff here doesn't balance the budget for me. Like by not funding this stuff, it's.
So we will bring those options back in terms of based on that direction is how we would look.
Yeah.
To balance that.
Which probably leads on to OPEX, but I've got to go. So. Yeah. But maybe that's probably just the direction there is finding those like where can we cut the savings. It's quite a big magnitude, so yeah. Got some options there, so thank you.
Rick, I'm feeling slightly happier. I'm never happy, but I'm like the tripod. I take a while to warm up. I'm not like a microwave. I can't keep
So thank you. We're adjourned at 5:00 something or other. 5:04. Thank you. Sorry, we're closed at 5:04.